Wait. Stop scrolling. Because what the Philadelphia Eagles just released after weeks of OTAs and Minicamp is going to change how you think about this team heading into the season. We are talking about a brand new depth chart. A depth chart full of shifts, surprises, confirmed expectations, and battles that haven't been decided yet. And today, we are going to break down every single thing on that depth chart, position by position, battle by battle, storyline by storyline. This is a full breakdown. A complete, comprehensive deep dive into what the Eagles built this off-season and what it means for the season ahead. So if you're an Eagles fan, buckle up. If you're an NFL fan who wants to understand what one of the best-built rosters in the league actually looks like right now, this is the video for you. And by the time we're done here, you'll understand exactly why a lot of people around the NFL are watching Philadelphia very, very closely right now. Let's get into it. Before we dive position by position, I need you to understand the context. Because context matters. And without it, a depth chart is just a list of names. The Philadelphia Eagles are coming off a season that ended in the best possible way. A Super Bowl. A championship. A Lombardi trophy sitting in that building in South Philadelphia. And when you're a team that just won the Super Bowl, when you're a team that just reached the absolute pinnacle of what's possible in this sport, the off-season question that hangs over everything is simple. Can you do it again? History says it's hard. History says defending championships is genuinely difficult. History says that the target goes on your back, the league adjusts to what you do, and the hunger that drives teams to win doesn't always survive success. But history also has exceptions. And the Eagles, the way they've approached this off-season, the way they've come back into that facility with purpose and energy and an almost unsettling focus on what comes next, the Eagles look like they're trying to be the exception. And the depth chart coming out of OTAs and Minicamp? It tells that story clearly. This isn't a team that's coasting. This isn't a team that's satisfied. This is a team that looked at last year's championship and decided it was the floor, not the ceiling. Now let's break it down. Chapter 1. The Quarterback Room. The first thing on any depth chart. The position everything else flows from. Quarterback. And specifically, Jalen Hurts. If you want to understand what Jalen Hurts means to the Eagles, you have to understand what he's had to overcome to get here. This is not a quarterback who had everything handed to him. This is not a guy who walked into a perfect situation and thrived. Jalen Hurts had to fight. He had to prove people wrong. He had to deal with questions about his throwing, about his ability to play in critical moments, about whether he was the right guy to lead this franchise. And he answered every single question. What OTAs and Minicamp showed about Jalen Hurts this offseason is a quarterback who has continued to develop. Who looks sharper? Who looks more comfortable? Who looks like a player? Who used the championship as fuel rather than as a finish line? Reporters on the field during those sessions noted his timing with receivers. The ball was coming out clean. The reads were quick. The footwork was on time. There's a precision to his game right now that comes from a combination of experience, confidence, and work. Because Jalen Hurts works. That's the one thing everyone around the Eagles will tell you about him, regardless of anything else. The man works. He puts in time that goes unseen. He's in that facility before most people arrive. He's studying film when other guys are sleeping. And that work ethic, that commitment to getting better, it shows up on the depth chart in the most obvious way possible. He's the number one quarterback. He's been the number one quarterback. He will be the number one quarterback. But here's the thing about the quarterback depth chart that people gloss over. The backup. In the NFL, you have to have a backup quarterback you trust. Not just someone to fill a roster spot, but someone who understands the system deeply, who can come in and execute if the unthinkable happens. And the Eagles' backup quarterback situation, what was established and clarified through Minicamp, reflects that the organization takes this seriously. They're not just filling a spot with a veteran who's collecting a check. They want a backup who can push Hurts in the meeting room, who can be a resource in film study, who can add something to the quarterback room's overall intelligence. The competition for that backup spot was real during OTAs. Multiple quarterbacks got snaps. Multiple guys had chances to demonstrate their understanding of the system, their accuracy, their ability to handle the offense at a high enough level that coaches could trust them if called on. And what came out of minicamp is clarity. There's a hierarchy in that quarterback room, and the depth chart reflects where coaches' confidence lies. But make no mistake about the primary message of the Eagles' quarterback depth chart. This is Jalen Hurts' team. It was his team last year. It is his team this year. And for the foreseeable future, as long as that extension keeps him in Philadelphia, it is his team. And that's a very good thing to build around. Chapter 2. The Running Back Room. Okay, let's talk about Saquon Barkley. And let me start by asking you this. Have you ever watched an athlete do something so far beyond what you expected that you had to stop and just appreciate it? Where the performance was so good, so historic, so dominant, that it didn't feel real while you were watching it? Because that's what Saquon Barkley gave the Eagles. That's what he gave the NFL. He came to Philadelphia with enormous expectations, the kind of expectations that crush players sometimes, and he didn't just meet them. He exceeded them in ways that were genuinely stunning. The rushing numbers, the yards after contact, the pass catching, the physical presence, the way he made defenses look helpless in a season where defenses had every reason to know he was coming. And the depth chart after OTAs and Minicamp has a very simple, very clear message at running back. Saquon Barkley is at the top. He's the starter. He's the feature back. He is the man. No competition for that spot. No debate. No drama. But here's what I want to focus on. Because the running back room as a whole, not just Barkley's spot, is genuinely interesting after what we learned from OTAs and Minicamp. The backup running backs. The depth and the Eagles' offense. Saquon Barkley carries a significant workload. He's a featured player in both the run game and the pass game. And carrying that kind of workload through an entire season, through 16 or 17 regular season games and potentially multiple playoff games, requires that the backup running backs be capable of stepping in and contributing. Not being Saquon. Nobody can be Saquon. But being capable, being reliable, being someone the offense can count on to move the chains, to handle a pass out of the backfield, to hit their assignment on a blocking play. And what minicamp revealed about the Eagles' backup running backs is that there's genuine competition for those spots. There are guys in that room who have talent, who have something to offer, who showed up to OTAs and minicamp and made coaches take notice. There were guys who lined up in pass protection and showed they could handle the responsibility. Guys who caught passes in the flat and showed reliable hands. Guys who hit the hole quickly and consistently on running plays, showing they understand the system and can execute within it. And some of those guys surprised people. Because here's the thing about the Eagles' running back room below Saquon. It's a room full of guys who know they're behind one of the greatest running backs in the world. And one of two things happens to players in that situation. Either they get discouraged, they check out, they stop competing because they know they're not going to take the starter's job, or they get inspired. They see the greatness up close and it makes them better. They compete harder because they know they're being evaluated not just against each other but against the standard that Saquon sets every single day. The guys who are still in that room, who are on that depth chart after OTAs and minicamp, they're the guys who responded the right way. They're competing. They're working. They're taking every rep seriously. And in a game where something unexpected can always happen, the quality of your depth at running back matters. The Eagles have been building that depth with intention. And the depth chart reflects the results of that intention. Now, something else worth mentioning about this backfield that doesn't always get the attention it deserves. Saquon Barkley's impact on this offense extends far beyond just the running plays. When defenses load the box to stop the run, when they bring an extra safety down, when they shade their linebackers toward the line of scrimmage, it creates opportunities in the passing game. It creates one-on-one coverage for A.J. Brown and DeVonta Smith on the outside. And Saquon himself as a receiving back? That's a nightmare problem for any linebacker who has to cover him in space. Barkley lined up in the slot, running a route into open grass, with Jalen Hurts throwing him the ball? That's an absolutely unfair situation for a middle linebacker. The Eagles know this. They designed their offense around it. And the depth chart reflects a backfield group that supports all of those dimensions, not just the between-the-tackle stuff, but the receiving elements and the coverage concerns that the backfield creates for defenses. Chapter 3. The Wide Receiver Core. Wide receivers. And let me just start with the top of the depth chart because it deserves the attention. A.J. Brown and DeVonta Smith. Say those two names together. Say them slowly. A.J. Brown and DeVonta Smith. Do you understand how lucky an offense is when those are your top two wide receivers? Do you understand how rare that combination is? How many teams in the NFL would give anything, would restructure their entire roster, would sacrifice draft picks, would overpay, just to have a wide receiving core with that kind of talent at the top? A.J. Brown at WR1. One of the most physically imposing, technically skilled, mentally sharp wide receivers in football. A guy who wins at every level of the field. Who can get open against press coverage. Who can win in the middle of the field against safeties. Who can turn a short catch into a long gain because of his ability to break tackles and run through contact. Who is one of the most difficult matchup problems any defensive coordinator has to deal with. And DeVonta Smith at WR2. A guy who wins in completely different ways. Where Brown wins with power and size, Smith wins with precision and quickness. His routes are works of art. His ability to separate from coverage, to create just enough space in tight windows, to be in the exact right spot at the exact right time, it's a skill that not many receivers have. And he makes it look natural, which makes people underestimate how difficult it actually is. At minicamp, both A.J. Brown and DeVonta Smith were present and active. And the connection with Jalen Hurts, the timing, the trust, the communication, it was evident even in a non-contact setting. That's the best news possible for Eagles fans. Because when the quarterback and his top receivers are on the same page in the spring, it builds something. It builds chemistry. It builds rhythm. It builds the kind of connection that shows up in October, in November, in January when it actually matters. Now, below the top two is where the real storylines are. The third and fourth receiver spots. The slot role. The depth. And this is where OTAs and Minicamp gave us a really interesting look at what the Eagles are working with. Because there were names that showed up. Names that stood out. Names that weren't necessarily expected to be in position to make an impact that early in the off-season process. Young receivers who flashed. Who ran good routes. Who made catches that got coaches to look up from their clipboards. Veterans who showed that they still have what it takes. Who competed with younger guys and held their own. Who demonstrated the kind of technical polish and route precision that you can only develop over years of playing at the professional level. And then there were guys in the middle, guys with potential, guys the Eagles drafted or signed with a specific purpose in mind, who had to prove that their potential was starting to become reality. The receiver competition below Brown and Smith is, honestly, one of the most compelling stories of this Eagles off-season. Because the spots available, there are only so many active roster positions for wide receivers, are legitimately up for grabs. And in the battles we saw during OTAs and Minicamp, what emerged is a clearer sense of where things stand. Who's pulling ahead? Who's falling behind? Who needs training camp and preseason games to make their final statement? One thing worth noting about the Eagles' approach to their receiver depth is the emphasis they put on guys who can play multiple positions. Guys who can line up outside, who can also work in the slot when needed. Guys who give the offense flexibility in how it deploys its personnel. Because the ability to move receivers around, to create different alignments, to make defenses adjust to different looks, that is a huge part of what makes this offense work at its best. And the depth chart at receiver reflects the Eagles' desire to have players who can contribute to that flexibility. The slot position in particular deserves its own conversation, because the slot receiver in the Eagles system has specific demands placed on him. He has to deal with linebackers at the line of scrimmage, which is a completely different challenge than handling a cornerback. He has to be comfortable running routes in the middle of the field where the traffic is. He has to understand protection calls and be able to help identify pressure. He has to be someone Jalen Hurts can trust on third down. And the battle for that slot spot, who gets the nod as the Eagles' primary slot option when they go to certain personnel groupings, that was one of the more fiercely contested competitions of the entire OTA and Minicamp period. What came out of it? There's a clearer picture now. There's a player who has separated himself in that competition. But Minicamp isn't the regular season. Training camp is coming. And when the pads come on, when the games get real, when it's a job fight in the most literal sense, things can change quickly. Stay tuned on that receiver room, because there are still storylines to watch there, and they're going to be very entertaining to follow when training camp opens. Chapter 4. The Tight End Room. Dallas Goedert. Let me tell you something about Dallas Goedert that doesn't always get said loudly enough. He is elite. Not pretty good for a tight end. Not solid contributor. Not reliable when healthy. Elite. When you watch how defenses try to game plan against the Eagles, there's a problem they always have. They have to decide how they're going to handle A.J. Brown. They have to decide how they're going to handle DeVonta Smith. They have to decide how they're going to deal with Saquon Barkley as a receiving weapon out of the backfield. And in the middle of all of that, Dallas Goedert, lined up in the seam, running a route that puts a linebacker in an impossible position, catching a pass in a spot where a linebacker had no business being in the first place, or split out wide, getting a cornerback who has to try to match his size and physicality, creating a mismatch in a completely different direction, or lining up in line, running a physical route against a safety, winning at the catch point with contested catchability that most tight ends in this league simply do not have. Dallas Goedert is a nightmare matchup, and he's a nightmare matchup in multiple different ways. That's what makes him elite. That's what makes him one of the most valuable players on this entire roster. At Minicamp, Goedert was healthy. He was working with the first team. He was catching balls from Jalen Hurts, and the timing between them was exactly what you'd want to see heading into a new season. Now, the depth behind Goedert, the second and third tight ends on this depth chart, that competition was real during OTAs. The Eagles need backup tight ends who can execute in this offense, who can block effectively in the run game, who can be trusted as passing options in the moments when Goedert isn't on the field or needs a breather. And what Minicamp showed is a clearer picture of who those guys are. Who's built for this system? Who understands what the Eagles ask of their tight ends? Who can be a factor in both the run and the passing game? The tight end room overall is in a good place. Goedert leads it, and leading it at the level he does means the foundation is strong. The depth behind him is being established. And as training camp approaches, the battles for the backup spots will give us more definitive answers about what this room looks like as a complete unit. Chapter 5. The Offensive Line. I want to take you somewhere for a second. Imagine you're a defensive coordinator. You're sitting in your film room. Your team is about to play the Philadelphia Eagles, and you're looking at their offensive line on tape. What do you feel? I'll tell you what you feel. You feel a knot in your stomach. Because what the Eagles have on their offensive line, the talent, the continuity, the coaching, the culture, it is genuinely difficult to game plan against. It's difficult to scheme against. It's difficult to simply overpower. The Eagles' offensive line is the best unit in the NFL. And I don't say that to start a debate. I say it because the evidence supports it. The run-blocking performance. The pass protection. The way they execute in critical situations. The way they respond when the game is on the line. Everything points to this being a unit that sets the standard for what an offensive line should look like in the modern NFL. And the depth chart after OTAs and Minicamp? It reflects everything we know about what this group is. Let's go from left to right. Left tackle. The Eagles' left tackle position is one of the most stable situations in the league. The starter has been developed, has been refined, and has established himself as one of the better left tackles in football. In OTAs and Minicamp, that stability showed. The first team's left tackle was working fluidly, moving well, and showing the kind of footwork and technique that pass protectors have to demonstrate at this level. There was no drama at that spot. No competition. Just a professional doing his job with confidence. Left guard. The interior of the Eagles' offensive line has been one of the most important factors in their success as a running team. The left guard position is held by a player who understands his role, who's been a consistent presence in the system, and who does the detail work that makes an offensive line function as a unit rather than just 5 individual players doing their own thing. The chemistry between the left guard and the center, the way those two communicate, the way they coordinate on double team blocks and combination blocks, that's something that takes time to build. And the Eagles have built it. Center. The center position on an NFL offensive line is uniquely demanding. You're snapping the ball. You're making protection calls. You're identifying blitzes and communicating them to the rest of the line. You're blocking nose tackles who weigh 310 pounds. And you're doing all of that while being in the absolute middle of the formation, surrounded on both sides by defenders and chaos. The Eagles center has taken hold of this position and made it his own. And the fact that he's done it in the shadow of one of the greatest centers in Eagles history, one of the most beloved players this franchise has ever had, makes it even more impressive. At Minicamp, the communication from the center was noted specifically by those who were paying close attention. The calls were being made quickly and accurately. The adjustments were happening in real time. And that kind of center field communication is what allows the rest of the offensive line to function with confidence and precision. Right guard. Similar to the left guard, this position requires the kind of physicality and technique that doesn't make highlight reels but wins football games. The Eagles' right guard situation was something that was evaluated during OTAs. Some competition happened at that position. And what Minicamp established is a clearer picture of who fits best in that spot, who the coaches trust on the right side of the interior. Right tackle. Lane Johnson. Let me say that name one more time. Lane Johnson. Because Lane Johnson at right tackle, when he's healthy and engaged, is a problem for any edge rusher in the NFL. He is a franchise icon. He is one of the best right tackles this city has ever seen. And at Minicamp, Johnson was doing what Johnson does, showing up, working, competing, being everything a right tackle needs to be. But the subplot worth discussing here is the depth. The swing tackle situation. The 6th offensive lineman. Because in today's NFL, offensive linemen get injured. It happens. And what your depth looks like when a starter goes down, whether you can weather that storm or whether it derails your season, that's determined by the work you did in the offseason to build that depth. And the Eagles were actively evaluating their offensive line depth during OTAs and Minicamp. Who can play multiple positions? Who can slide inside from tackle to guard in an emergency? Who has enough experience in the system that they won't destroy a drive when they're called upon for a series or a quarter or, God forbid, a full game? The depth on the offensive line, what OTAs and Minicamp revealed about those guys, is a Significant storyline. Because the Eagles know they can't count on having all 5 starters available for every single game. The question is what their contingency plans look like. And what the depth chart shows is that the Eagles have thought carefully about who those contingency guys are. They've identified the players who can provide that versatility. And those players have been evaluated and placed on the depth chart in a way that gives this team real options if something unexpected happens. That's the unsexy work of roster building. That's the stuff that doesn't get the headlines. But it matters. It matters more than almost anything else when you're trying to sustain success through a full NFL season. Chapter 6. The Defensive Line. Let me tell you about what dominance looks like on a football field. Real dominance. Not the flashy kind. Not just the sacks and the tackles for loss that show up on the highlight reel. I mean the kind of dominance that changes the way an offense operates before a single play has even been called. The kind of dominance where an offensive coordinator is drawing up a run play to the left side of the formation and then looks up at the depth chart and says, "We can't run it there. Not against that guy. Change the play." The kind of dominance that shows up not in the stats but in the plays that were never run because of who was on the field. Jalen Carter has that kind of dominance. And if you haven't been paying close attention to what Carter has been doing, to his emergence, to what he has become as a defensive player, you are missing one of the most compelling developmental stories in the entire NFL. Carter came into the league with enormous talent. The kind of talent that makes scouts lose their minds. The kind of talent that makes coaches dream about what they can do with a player. But talent is one thing. Turning talent into consistent, game-changing performance is something else entirely. And Jalen Carter? He has done that. What Minicamp showed about Jalen Carter this offseason was the kind of engagement, the kind of motor, the kind of passion that you love to see from a player at his position. He was moving. Well, he was quick. He was disruptive even in a non-padded setting where defensive linemen aren't supposed to be the most visually impressive people on the field. And here's the most exciting part. He is still only getting better. Think about that for a second. A player who has already established himself as one of the most disruptive interior defensive linemen in football is still improving, still developing, still adding to his game with each off-season, each training camp, each season of experience. That should terrify offensive linemen around the NFL. The depth behind Carter on the defensive line, the defensive tackle rotation, is something the Eagles worked on clarifying during OTAs and Minicamp. Because you need rotational pieces. At defensive tackle, you need guys who can give Carter a rest without the interior defense completely falling apart. You need guys who can be trusted in key situations to hold their ground, to fill their gap, to not be the weak point that offenses attack. And the defensive end positions, the edge rushers on the outside of this defensive line. That's where there are some interesting depth chart developments coming out of Minicamp. Because the Eagles' pass rush is built on more than just one or two guys. They want a rotation of rushers who can bring different looks, different angles, different skill sets. Guys who win with speed. Guys who win with power. Guys who can bend the corner. Guys who play with tremendous leverage and technique. And the depth chart at defensive end, after Minicamp, reflects the Eagles' belief about who their best pass rush options are beyond the starters, who can come in and be effective on a 3rd and 7 when the defense needs a push, who can be trusted in the 4th quarter of a playoff game. Those guys are on the depth chart. Their placement tells you exactly how much trust the coaches have placed in them. What also stood out from Minicamp reporting was the overall energy along the defensive line as a group. This is a position group that has fully bought into the identity the Eagles are trying to establish on the defensive side of the ball. They're physical. They're aggressive. They hold each other accountable. They compete in practice in a way that makes everyone in that defensive line room better. That kind of culture along the defensive line, that translates to Sundays. That's not just Motivation poster stuff. That's real, tangible competitive energy that makes a defense function at a higher level when the games count. Chapter 7. The Linebacker Room. The Linebacker Room. And I want to start with a simple observation that gets overlooked constantly in these conversations. Good linebacker play is invisible. The best linebackers in the NFL, the guys who are truly excellent at their position, they make everything look easy. They're in the right gap on run plays. They're in the right zone in coverage. They make tackles that stop 3rd and 3 conversions. They blitz at the right times. They communicate the coverage calls so the entire defense is aligned before the snap. And nobody talks about it. Nobody puts it on the highlight reel. Because it looks routine. It looks like it was supposed to happen that way. But it only looks routine because a great linebacker is doing their job perfectly. Zack Baun's emergence has been one of the real stories of the Eagles' defensive transformation. Here was a player who didn't immediately become what everyone expected. When he came into the league, he had to develop. He had to learn. He had to adjust to the speed and complexity of NFL football. And then something clicked. And when something clicks for a player with Baun's athleticism and football intelligence, it can click fast. And what clicked for Baun became a version of himself that this Eagles defense built around a linebacker who could run with tight ends in coverage, who could cover running backs out of the backfield, who was reliable in space, which is the single most important skill for linebackers in the modern NFL, while also being physical enough to fill gaps in the run game and not get bullied at the point of attack. At minicamp, Baun was the first-team linebacker. He was working in his role with the kind of comfort and confidence that comes from having done it at a high level, from having been in that system, from knowing exactly what's being asked of him on every snap. He wasn't thinking about his position in the defense. He was just playing football. And when a player reaches that point, where the thinking is gone and the playing just happens, that's when they become dangerous in a way that's hard to defend against. Nakobe Dean brings a completely different set of gifts to this linebacker room. Dean's football intelligence, his ability to read a play before it fully develops, his communication skills, his understanding of where everyone is supposed to be on every snap, those are traits that are genuinely rare in this league. And they make the linebacker room function better as a unit. Because Dean is essentially a coach on the field. He gets everyone lined up. He identifies the protection. He communicates the adjustments. The depth at linebacker, the guys behind the starters who are competing for roster spots and special teams roles, had to compete during OTAs. Had to show they understand the system. Had to demonstrate that they can be trusted in a real game situation if their number gets called. And what minicamp showed is that there's enough depth in this room to feel comfortable about. What happens if a starter misses time? That's not always the case with every team's linebacker room. For the Eagles, it is. Chapter 8. The Secondary. The Secondary. And let's start with something really important that I want you to hold on to throughout this whole section. The Eagles' secondary is in a period of transition and genuine growth. And that's not a weakness I'm trying to spin into a positive. It's actually one of the most exciting things about this defense. Because when you're in growth mode at cornerback and safety, when you have young players developing, when you have talent that hasn't fully bloomed yet, that means the ceiling is high. That means there's more to come. That means the best from this unit is potentially still ahead of them. And Cooper DeJean is the embodiment of that upward trajectory. Cooper DeJean, coming off his experience in the 2024 season, has shown that he belongs at this level. He's shown the instincts, the athleticism, the willingness to compete that you need from a cornerback in the NFL. He's shown the ability to stay cool in big moments, to not let the spotlight affect how he plays, to compete against elite wide receivers with the kind of confidence that young corners don't always possess. And what minicamp showed about DeJean is a player who is actively improving those traits. His footwork was better. His understanding of route concepts was sharper. His ability to play the ball in the air, That tracking skill that separates good corners from great ones, it looked more refined than it did before. That's the story you want from a young cornerback. Not just talent, but measurable, visible growth from one phase of his career to the next. Now, the depth at cornerback. Who's behind DeJean? Who else is in this cornerback room? How many guys can you trust to play significant snaps in a real game? That's where Minicamp gave us really interesting information. The battles for the depth cornerback positions were competitive. Multiple guys had snaps. Multiple guys got chances to show what they could do in coverage drills, in one-on-one periods, in team periods where they're lining up across from A.J. Brown and DeVonta Smith and trying to not let those guys embarrass them. And some guys took those chances and made the most of them. Others struggled, were exposed, had moments that told coaches exactly where their development still needs to go. And the depth chart that came out of Minicamp reflects those outcomes honestly. The guys at the top of the cornerback depth chart are the guys who showed up and competed. The guys lower on the chart are the ones who still have work to do before they can be fully trusted in a game situation. The safety positions are equally critical for what the Eagles want to accomplish defensively, because their coverage scheme depends on what the safeties communicate and where they line up. It depends on how they adjust to what the offense is showing pre-snap. It depends on their ability to be in the right spot against both the run and the pass. The Eagles safety room went through OTAs with some different looks. Different combinations were tried. Different guys got chances to show their versatility, their communication skills, their ability to process the complexity of what the Eagles ask their safeties to do. What came out of Minicamp is a defined picture at the safety positions. There are starters. There's depth. And the roles are clearer now than they were when OTAs began. But here's the honest truth about the secondary as a whole. This is going to be the most scrutinized unit on this defense when the real games start. Because if the Eagles' pass rush is everything it can be, if the defensive front is applying consistent pressure, the secondary just has to hold coverage for a second or two and everything works. But the moments when coverage has to hold longer, when the offense runs their protection well and the quarterback has extra time, those are the moments where the secondary's quality determines outcomes. Those are the moments when you find out if the young players are ready, if the depth is reliable, if the investment in this part of the roster was the right one. Watch the secondary. Watch how they develop through training camp and into the regular season. Because the growth of this unit could be one of the defining storylines of the entire Eagles season. Chapter 9. Special Teams and Roster Battles. Let me tell you about a part of football that doesn't get nearly enough credit. Special teams. And specifically, the way special teams battles are fought during OTAs and Minicamp. Here's something that casual fans don't always fully understand. For a lot of players on an NFL roster, the guys who aren't starters, the guys who aren't featured pieces of the offense or defense, their position on this team is determined almost entirely by what they can do on special teams. A receiver who's 5th or 6th in the depth chart at his position. He makes the roster if he's a weapon on punt coverage, if he hustles down on kickoffs, if he can be trusted in special teams. Moments that change the field position battle and swing the momentum of a game. A defensive back who's not in the top 4 at his position? He makes the roster if he can play on every special teams unit, if he can tackle in open space, if he understands the schemes and can execute them reliably in game situations. During OTAs and Minicamp, the Eagles were watching their players in special teams contexts with the same intensity they were watching them in offensive and defensive position drills. Because those special teams battles, who gets the spots on coverage units, who earns the return opportunities, who competes with enough effort to be trusted, those battles are just as important as any positional depth chart battle. The kicker position, the punter position, the long snapper. Those 3 spots, once established, tend to be stable situations. And the Eagles have their answers at all 3. But the overall special teams roster, who's on which unit, who's earned the trust of the special teams coordinator, who has shown the kind of relentless effort and execution on those units that makes coaches feel confident putting them on the field. All of that was being sorted out during this off-season period. What the full depth chart reflects, when you look at the whole roster picture and understand who's going to be on which special teams units, is a group that the Eagles have put genuine thought into. Not just filling spots. Building teams that can be competitive, that can cover kicks, that can protect punts, that can create moments in the return game that shift the entire flow of a football game. And in a tight playoff game, in January, when everything is on the line, special teams can be the difference. The Eagles know that. The depth chart reflects that they've taken it seriously. From the very first day of OTAs. Chapter 10. The Bigger Picture and Championship Context. Alright. I've walked you through the depth chart position by position. I've given you the key battles, the key names, the key storylines. But now I want to take a step back. I want to give you the bigger picture. Because a depth chart is more than a list of names. It's a statement of intent. It's a reflection of values. It's a window into what an organization believes and how they plan to execute those beliefs on a football field. And the Eagles' depth chart after OTAs and Minicamp tells a very specific story. It tells the story of a team that is built to be balanced. And I want you to really sit with that for a second. Because balance is not always what fans celebrate. Fans celebrate the stars, the highlights, the game-breaking plays. And the Eagles have that. They have Jalen Hurts, they have Saquon Barkley, they have A.J. Brown and DeVonta Smith, they have Jalen Carter, they have DeJean. They have elite players at critical positions. But the depth chart, the full depth chart, when you look at it from position 1 through the last man on the roster, what it reflects is a team that has been built with genuine care at every level. Where the second and third guys at each position aren't afterthoughts. Where the backup doesn't just exist to fill a roster spot, but is someone who has been developed, coached, and prepared to contribute when called upon. That is a winning organization philosophy. That is how Super Bowl teams are built. Not by having the 10 best players. By having the 53 most prepared players. By having a roster where the backup tight end is ready when his name is called. Where the third cornerback can be trusted in a playoff game. Where the depth on the offensive line means you don't panic when a starter goes down in Week 9. That's what the depth chart says about this Eagles team. It also says something about the culture. Because one thing that came through very clearly during OTAs and Minicamp was the energy in that building. The enthusiasm. The level of competition. The way players are engaged and focused and holding each other accountable. Defending champions can sometimes have a different feel about them in the off-season. There can be complacency. There can be a sense that the work is already done. That the mountain has been climbed and there's nothing left to prove. But that's not the vibe coming out of the Eagles facility. The vibe coming out of there is a team that is hungry. A team that knows what they accomplished last season and wants more. A team that isn't satisfied. A team that has looked at everything they achieved and decided it was only the beginning of what this group of players is capable of. And that mentality, that's the hardest thing in the world to develop and maintain. It's easy to be hungry when you haven't won. It's genuinely, profoundly difficult to stay hungry after you have. The Eagles, from all the reporting and all the observations coming out of their facility, appear to be staying hungry. Chapter 11. The NFC Competition. Now let me step back even further. Because understanding the depth chart in isolation isn't enough. You have to understand it in the context of what it's competing against. The NFC. Because the road to another Super Bowl runs through the NFC first. And the NFC is not a weak conference. There are teams in this conference that have been building for their own runs. Teams that have been retooling their rosters. Teams that have acquired talent specifically designed to compete with what Philadelphia has built. Every team in this conference is watching the Eagles. Every team in this conference has drawn up plans for how to beat the Eagles. Every team in this conference knows exactly what the Eagles want to do and has spent the offseason trying to figure out how to stop it. And the Eagles know this. Good organizations always know this. They know the target is on their back. They know the league is coming for them. And they plan accordingly. The depth chart is one part of that planning. By building depth, by creating situations where the second and third options can contribute, by making it so that defenses can't just key on one player or one unit and shut everything down, the Eagles are building a roster that is hard to game plan against even when you know exactly what they want to do. At quarterback, Jalen Hurts is in the conversation with the best quarterbacks in the conference. He's a player who has done everything at the highest level, who has led this team to a championship, who has proven he can perform when the stakes are as high as they get. At running back, there's arguably nobody in the NFC at Saquon Barkley's level. Nobody who provides that combination of between the tackles power, receiving ability, and big play potential. At wide receiver, A.J. Brown and DeVonta Smith as a 1-2 combination is a matchup problem for every defensive coordinator in the conference. Having two players of that caliber as your starting receivers is something very few teams anywhere in the NFL can say, let alone the NFC. On the offensive line, the Eagles set the standard. Full stop. On the defensive side, with Jalen Carter anchoring the interior and the secondary developing, the Eagles have the pieces to be a top defensive team in the conference when everything comes together. All of that context matters when you look at the depth chart, because the depth chart is the Eagles' roster statement to the rest of the NFC. It's what they're putting forward, and what they're putting forward can compete with anyone, with any team, in any stadium, in any game. Situation. Chapter 12. Position battles to watch in training camp. But wait. Before we close out this depth chart conversation, I want to do one more thing. I want to tell you exactly which position battles you need to be watching when training camp opens. Because OTAs and Minicamp gave us clarity in some areas and more questions in others. And the ones where questions remain, those are the ones that training camp is going to answer definitively. The receiver depth battles. I touched on this earlier, but I want to come back to it. Because the Eagles' receiver room below A.J. Brown and DeVonta Smith is still genuinely unsettled in certain spots. There are players competing for active roster spots. There are players who showed well in minicamp who will try to carry that momentum into camp. There are veteran players who will not give up their roster spots without an absolute fight. And there are young players who know that training camp is the moment, the specific, singular moment, where careers are made. That battle is going to be one of the most compelling storylines of Eagles training camp. Watch it closely. The cornerback depth competition. We talked about DeJean. We talked about the top of the depth chart. But the secondary roster spots, the third and fourth cornerback, the guys who will be on the active roster and potentially playing significant snaps when injuries happen, those positions are not yet fully locked in. Training camp, with padded practices and then preseason games, is going to establish that depth chart with much more certainty than anything we saw during OTAs and Minicamp. And the battles in the secondary are going to be intense because everyone in that room knows that being a contributing cornerback on this Eagles defense is an opportunity. A real one. Watch that secondary competition carefully when camp opens. The offensive line depth. The starters are set. But the swing tackle, the sixth lineman, the guy who can play multiple positions in a pinch, those spots will be seriously contested in training camp. And for offensive linemen, training camp is where you really see what guys are made of. Because now you're in pads. Now there are pass rushers coming at you for real. Now you have to actually handle the physicality, not just the mental and technical work of OTA drills. Who emerges from training camp as the Eagles' best backup option on the offensive line? That's a question absolutely worth watching. The edge rusher rotation. Who gets the third and fourth snaps in the pass rush rotation? Who's the guy that comes in for a big moment and delivers a sack or a hurry that changes a drive? The Eagles have clarity at the top of their edge rush group. But the rotation behind the starters, who's in, who's out, who can be trusted in the fourth quarter of a playoff game in January, that's going to be established in training camp and the preseason. Pay attention to the edge rusher depth battle. It will be one of the more physically intense competitions of the entire camp period. The running back room below Saquon. I know I said Saquon Barkley's spot is locked in. It is. But behind him, the battles for the second and third running back spots, who gets the passing down work, who gets the early down work when Saquon needs a rest, who's the third back on the 53-man roster, that competition is very much alive going into camp. And for the guys in that running back room who are not named Saquon, this is their moment. Training camp and preseason is their audition. Their chance to make the coaching staff see them differently. To move up the depth chart. To prove they belong on this team. Chapter 13. What history tells us about preseason depth charts. Now here's something really interesting. Something I don't think enough people think about when they analyze these OTA and minicamp depth charts. What does history actually tell us about how accurate they end up being when the season starts? And the honest answer is, they're a starting point. They're not the finish line. They never are. Think about it. Think about some of the most important players on the best Eagles teams in recent memory. How many of them emerged from positions on the depth chart that nobody was talking about in the spring? How many guys became essential contributors, became guys who made huge plays in enormous moments after starting out as fourth or fifth on the depth chart? During OTAs, the NFL is a league of attrition and opportunity. Depth charts change. Injuries happen. Players emerge from seemingly nowhere. Players who were expected to contribute fall back. The roster that takes the field in the first playoff game of January is often quite different from the roster that was assembled during the spring. And every single year, without exception, there are players who spend OTAs and minicamp in the middle or bottom of the depth chart, who work their way up during training camp and preseason, who make the team and then contribute in ways that nobody in this video could have predicted. The Eagles' current depth chart is the baseline. It tells you where coaches' heads are at this specific moment in time. It gives you a sense of the hierarchy as it currently exists. But that hierarchy is not carved into stone. Training camp starts soon. Then there are preseason games. Then the final roster cuts. Then the real season begins. And between now and week 1 of the regular season, this depth chart is going to change. Names are going to move. Spots are going to shift. Some positions that look settled are going to open up. Some competitions that look wide open are going to close faster than anyone expected. That's the nature of football. That's what makes following a team through the off-season so compelling. It's not just about what the depth chart looks like today. It's about tracking the journey, watching the evolution, seeing which of the storylines we've talked about today actually come to fruition. And when they do, when the player who won the receiver battle in training camp makes a huge catch in a playoff game, or when the corner who fought for his spot in camp makes an interception in a big moment when everything is on the line, that's when all this off-season analysis pays off in the most satisfying way possible. Because you watched the journey from the very beginning. Chapter 14. The Championship Window Question. Let me ask you a serious question. How long does this window stay open? Because right now, the Philadelphia Eagles are in the middle of what appears to be a genuine, legitimate championship window. They have their quarterback locked in. They have elite talent on both sides of the ball. They have a coaching staff that knows how to win and knows how to build. They have an offensive line that is the envy of the entire league. They have Saquon Barkley in what should be the absolute prime of his career. They have 2 of the best wide receivers in football in A.J. Brown and DeVonta Smith. They have a defensive line with a genuine elite player in Jalen Carter. They have a secondary developing exactly the way you want a secondary to develop. This is a special group of players. But windows don't last forever. They never do. Contracts get more complicated. Players age. The league catches up to schemes. Unexpected things happen, they always do, and the landscape changes in ways that nobody could have predicted. And so the urgency of what the Eagles are doing right now, the urgency of how they're building this roster, the urgency of getting every depth chart position right, the urgency of not wasting a single practice rep or a single chance to evaluate a player during OTAs and Minicamp. That comes from knowing that windows are precious, that windows are finite, that you don't always know how many shots you're going to get at the highest level of competition. The Eagles have come back from their championship and they've built again. They've evaluated. They've made changes where changes were needed. They've reinforced what was already working. They've added pieces where they saw opportunities to improve. And the depth chart coming out of OTAs and Minicamp strongly suggests, that this isn't a team coasting on last year's success. This is a team building to compete again. Building to win again. That's what champions do. The ones who sustain it. The ones who make dynasty conversations relevant. They don't sit still after success. They don't allow themselves to rest. They look at what they have, they look at where they need to improve, they make the moves they need to make, and they come back ready to compete with every bit of the same intensity as before. The Eagles' depth chart is evidence of that commitment. Chapter 15. The Final Verdict. All right. Let me bring this home. The Philadelphia Eagles revealed their depth chart after OTAs and Minicamp. And what it shows us is a team that has elite talent at the skill positions. That has one of the best defensive lines in all of football. That has a defensive line with a genuine star in Jalen Carter and real depth built around him. That has a linebacker room that has quietly become one of the better units in the NFC. That has a secondary with exciting young talent and real developmental upside. That has a special teams unit that reflects the same level of attention and care as every other position group on this roster. And most importantly, has a culture of preparation, a culture of competition, a culture of accountability, a culture that was built over years and that produced a Super Bowl championship and a team that is not done yet. The depth chart is a snapshot. It's a moment in time. It's going to change. Players are going to move. Positions are going to shift. New stars are going to emerge, and some expectations are going to be readjusted as we get to the real games. But the snapshot we have right now, the depth chart as it stands after OTAs and Minicamp, tells the story of a team that is seriously, genuinely, legitimately built to compete for another championship. And if you're an Eagles fan, that's a beautiful thing. Take a moment to appreciate what this organization has put together. If you're a fan of another NFC team, be nervous. Because this Eagles team is not done. This Eagles team is not satisfied. This Eagles team looked at everything they accomplished and decided it was only the beginning. The depth chart reflects all of that. It reflects an organization that knows exactly what it's doing. That has a clear vision for this roster, and that has been executing that vision with precision and care since the moment the confetti from the Super Bowl celebration fell to the ground. So as we head toward training camp, as we get closer to the start of the real season, as the battles we've talked about today get settled for real with pads on, as the preseason games give us even more information, keep all of this in mind. Keep the depth chart in mind. Keep the storylines in mind. Keep the questions in mind. And remember that what we saw during OTAs and Minicamp is the beginning of a story. Not the end. Never the end. The Philadelphia Eagles have the pieces. They have the talent. They have the culture. They have the quarterback. They have the running back. They have the offensive line. They have the defensive playmakers. Now we get to watch and see what they do with all of it. And if the offseason is any indication, if the energy, the focus, the preparation, the competition that came out of that facility during OTAs and Minicamp is any indication, this is going to be a very, very fun team to follow. One of the most fun teams in the NFL. And we are going to be covering every step of the journey. That's the full Eagles OTA and Minicamp depth chart breakdown. If you made it all the way to the end, thank you. Genuinely. That means everything. Drop a comment below telling me which position battle you are most excited to watch when training camp opens. I read every single comment and I want to hear your thoughts on this team. If this video brought you value, hit that like button. It takes 2 seconds and it makes a real difference in getting this content in front of Eagles fans who want this kind of detailed, deep analysis. And if you are not subscribed yet, subscribe right now. Because training camp is just around the corner, and we are going to be covering every single battle, every roster move, every depth chart update, every story that comes out of the Eagles facility between now and the opening of the regular season. You do not want to miss any of it. The Eagles are loaded. The season is coming. The conversations are just getting started. Fly, Eagles, fly. I will see you in the next one.